This is the Book of Dad with Robert Benson, an upbeat weekly review of personal anecdotes, helpful tips, and communal chat about the ups and downs of parenting. Your host, Robert Benson, knows that being a dad is not easy, but this show is for all the dads just trying to do their best. Now, here's Robert.
Hey, welcome back to the Book of Dad radio show. This is Dr. Robert Benson. As always, before we get started, we want to say thank you to Jehovah. Thank Him for His Son, Jesus Christ. Thank Him for our families. Thank Him for work and our ability to do the things we are able to do. Book of Dad radio show, Life and Spirit Online, only on the NASCA Network. Speaking of the NASCA Network, I got my main man, Eddie G, hanging out. What's up, Eddie?
Hey, sir. How you feel today?
I'm doing great, man. Welcome aboard again. I mean, it's starting to become a usual thing, you and me hanging out together, huh?
Yeah, I'm going to have to start charging you, man.
But there's a really, really nice picture of us on the website there. You know, I want people to know that that's kind of a blended photo. You're not really in back of me like that, right?
Yeah, we're not Siamese twins at all. We look alike.
Yeah, that's true. But hey, anyway, man, it's always great to have Eddie G hanging out on the Book of Dad radio show, Dr. Robert Benson. But we always bring you guys great stories, great people, great information, and providing a venue for people to tell their story. Today we got a great guest, someone who again is from that great talent-rich oasis, Chester, Pennsylvania, and she's a Penn State alumni, as we found out, which is good for her, I think. I'm not really sure about that, but we're going to stop babbling around and say hello to Miss Robin Carroll. Hey, Robin, how are you?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
Good. Well, thanks for hanging out on the Book of Dad radio show. So why on earth...
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So why on earth would we even want to talk to you? What's up?
So I'm actually in the process of putting a book that I published on sale in the next few weeks. Mm-hmm. It is called Two-Faced. I've been working on it for years. It is a thriller, suspense, mystery with a little bit of romance. So it has a little bit of everything for anyone that's interested in those genres.
Oh, well, okay. That's pretty good. So what kind of led you to talk about this, that mesh, if you will, of all these different genres into one publication?
Yes. I actually have, for me, I like to read those type of books. But I like to also make sure that the books that I read have, a lot of, it's all about the characters. Yeah, it has those elements in it, but to make sure that it actually has, really good characters that I can really, love or hate or, whatever the case may be. And so, with me having all those different kind of genres in one book, the most important piece of the book to me is the characters. Mm-hmm. And, anyone that reads it is going to walk away and say, you know what, I love the fact that it had the mystery and the suspense and all those other elements, but the most important thing that I think people are going to walk away with is the fact that I had great characters, and they're going to want to know more about those characters when they're done that book. So they're going to be like, okay, Robin, so where's the sequel now? Because we still need to know what happens with these characters.
Wow. So you're going to leave them wanting more. And, you must have been reading my mind, because my next question was, in fact, going to be, is this the start of a series of publications or books that head off in several different directions based on these primary characters? Okay, interesting.
That is true. So I already started writing the sequel. The sequel is actually called Dream Killer. So my goal is to have that book out sometime next year. So before the year is out, you should see those, on the shelves and, online too. So I'm working, diligently on it. And so hopefully, people will actually, you want people to love your first book, obviously, but this second book is going to be crazy. Like the ideas that I have and the things that I'm working on, I think people may actually end up liking the second book more than the first. And that's saying a lot, because usually that doesn't happen. People have that sophomore jinx where, they don't necessarily like the second project, but I think people are going to like the second project with my book more than the first one.
Well, You know, I've heard people say several times, Robin, that everyone kind of walks around with several novels floating around in their head. What is it that happened that made you sit down and eventually actually and tangibly be able to just pen what it is that you've penned?
You know, what you said is absolutely true. You know, for me, and I'll tell anyone that knows me this, and it may seem crazy to some people that aren't writers, but I constantly have voices in my head. You know, and not in a crazy, you know, Robin, go out and kill someone type of way.
Yeah, I'm glad you clarified that, Robin. Who are we talking to here?
Right, exactly, right? Just in, you know, people that want me to tell their stories. Like, before I sit down to write anything, I already know this character personally, like, because they've already talked to me and pretty much said to me, hey, I want you to tell my story. And so there are writers that probably have a whole outline of what they want the characters to do, what they want the content to be, and how they want it to flow. I don't have that. When I sit down, you know, I finally decide, hey, you know, I'm going to tell this character story because they've already bothered me enough where I can't even sleep to say, hey, tell this story. And when I sit down, I allow those characters to talk to me and tell me what they want me to say.
Wow.
So it's very different for me, and it's always been that way. And so I finally got to a point where I'm like, okay, you need to do something with these voices in your head, because if you don't, they're never going to disappear. Because that's, to me, it's almost like God speaking to me through these characters and saying, hey, this is what I want you to do. This is your talent. You know, this is the talent that I've given you. You know, you need to utilize it, you know, to the best of your ability. And so there was no way I couldn't write a book. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I got to this place. So it took me years to actually sit down and say, okay, I'm going to do this. And then the problem with me is that for me, everything has to be perfect. And so I wrote it and I rewrote it. And then I rewrote it again, and I rewrote it again, you know, and I finally got to a place where I felt like it was good enough and said, okay, now it's time for me to finally put this book out there.
Did you have a couple of alternative endings that you came up with? Oh,
absolutely. Yep, absolutely. You know, when I first, I didn't know who the killer was going to be. You know, I had all these characters, you know, and I didn't want to be like, sometimes when you have a mystery, you have a lot of characters for the reason to try to confuse the person, you know, so they don't know who the killer is. But I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to fill my book with fluff where I just have characters that are just there to kind of throw the reader off, you know. And so in order to do that, in order to make sure that I didn't have a bunch of characters, you know, just to have characters, you know, I'm like, okay, I need to make sure that this all makes sense. And, you know, and for it to make sure it made sense, I wrote several different endings. And I'm like, okay, which one of these endings is going to make the most sense based off of the characters, based off of the story itself? So.
Interesting. You know, the thing that I find interesting is that you were saying that you're being spoken to by all these different voices, besides the fact that I think you might be a little disturbed or touched.
I'm okay. I'm actually okay with that. Okay. I'm actually okay with being touched and disturbed.
But anyway, I mean, imagine, the level of that type of internal communication, if you will. I mean, some of the greatest movie producers or writers and such have that type of internal tug of war, so to speak, going on. I mean, look at the many different characters that manifest themselves through the work of Tyler Perry, Eddie Murphy, Martin, and all of those great people in the industry right now today.
Yes.
Okay. Well, again, like I say, so we're going to have Robin's book published on, or not published, but advertised here on our network, and we're going to get some of the synopsis information out to you. And we're going to talk a little bit more to Robin about Robin when we come right back. So this is Dr. Robert Benson with the Book of Dad radio show, Life and Spirit Online only on NASCA Network with Eddie G, and we'll be right back.
Hey, this is Erica Janae, and you're listening to Life and Spirit Radio.
The U.S. dollar will collapse. Learn why you should buy physical silver and gold. Order Dr. G's P3. Plan, prepare, protect. Visit www.ygliv.com or call 800-705-6840.
Hey, we're right back. Dr. Robert Benson with my main man, Eddie G, and Miss Robin Michelle Carroll. That's her name. Yeah, Robin Michelle Carroll. I like that. That's a really beautiful name. Anyway, but when I left off, we were talking about how the inner turmoil or communicative turmoil within an individual can lead to great musing and great spewing of writings and the production of movies and those types of things. And I think that Robin may be onto something with this type of thought process. I
agree. And with the complex characters and the storyline, I think that the possibility of translating your book to film would be a good idea. Has that ever crossed your mind, or have you been talking to anybody about future film projects?
Absolutely. I actually, my first year at Penn State, I went to Penn State University. My first year there, I was actually a film student. I actually wanted to make movies. I wanted to be like the female Spike Lee back when I was in college, and that's what I used to call myself. I mean, that's what I truly wanted to do. I wanted to take the work that I'd written and turn those into films. And so that is still, a passion of mine. It's still a goal. It's definitely something that I would like to do very soon. And to see, Two-Faced, my first book, and then Dream Killer turn into movies would be a dream fulfilled for me. So, yes, definitely.
Well, being a videographer and a television person myself, I always wanted to do film, but the part that eludes me is the writing part, because the creativity might be there, but you have to have a certain talent for writing, as you do, so that you can be an author and you can do screenplays. And that's a side of it that I could never grab a hold of it. I'm more of the visual and technical side of it. But I know how hard it is to create a storyline and build those characters and all those things, especially in a way where it gives great interest to the people watching. And the opportunity is going to come for you to translate that to film. And since you have that background, I guess you can be involved behind the scenes as a director as well, right?
Absolutely. That's, I'm going to tell you guys a really quick story. So, when I was in film class, obviously I had no clue, what I was doing because it was new, and it was just one of those things where, when the first day of class, the professor was like, typically it's film students, didn't earn anything above, typically he gave out C's and D's because, because it's a first year class, people really don't know what they're doing. And so, he's like, typically that's the first, those are the grades that he gives out. And so for me, I'm like, that's a challenge. I'm like, okay, so you're telling me that, I can't get more than a B in your class. And so my first couple of projects, I got C's and I got B's, and I'm just like, okay, this final project, I need to make this final project like the best thing my professor has ever seen. And so the good thing about my final project was that I wrote it. You know what I mean? So I wrote it, and I was able to, put my vision out there for the world to see on video. And so I got an A-, but it was still an A. And so, and I believe that was because I was able to use that creativity that other people in my class didn't have. They didn't have that writing skill. You know what I mean? So I was able to use that to go above and beyond and get an A in that professor's class.
Well, and I bet he probably put you on his Hall of Fame of students probably after that, you know what I mean?
I love it. Yeah. So, but, the fact that I'm able to write, and when I write, I have a vision of the characters. I know what they look like, I know what they sound like. And so being able to kind of translate that, on video is it's like I said, it's a dream fulfilled for me.
You know, the thing that I find very, very interesting is that, I mean, if you're a novel reader and you get into to watch the movies, the movie kind of pales, if you will, in comparison to what the written word usually is. As a matter of fact, it's a mirror, and that I've noticed, a mere microcosm of what is written. I mean, a book itself could be, you know, hundreds of pages, but you're trying to squeeze in a story into, you know, that's been written for a long amount of time into about an hour or two of entertainment, if you will. Talk about, if you would, the challenges that you see with someone being able to tell the story for something that you've mused over for some time, that you've really put all of these characters in your head onto paper, to someone maybe trying to give a complete story about what it is that you're trying to say, if that can be done.
It would be extremely, extremely difficult. You know, if you start off with just a screenplay and it's not a full-blown book, then, you know, that's easier because obviously you already, you have that character development in the screenplay, but you don't have, you know, the full story that you get from obviously reading a book, because you get that deep dive into the characters' backgrounds and why the characters are the way that they are. And when you have an hour and a half of a movie, you just don't have time to really tell the full story. And so sometimes when you watch a movie, you know, that was a book, you're just like, oh, they missed this and they didn't say this. And, you know, and so at the end, you don't feel like you have a lot of questions, and you feel like it you know, there needs to be like two or three more movies to kind of, you know, to get the story to be complete. And so, you know, I think it would be really difficult to get someone else, especially, to write a screenplay based off of a book that you've written, because, you know, they're going to miss some things. And I think for the writer, it's important to say these are the elements that you definitely need to put in the film, because it makes this story make sense, and it'll make it make sense to the viewers. So when you have someone else that's taking an interpretation of your characters in your book and putting it into a screenplay, then they don't really understand the characters the way you do. They don't understand the story the way that you do. And so I think it makes it, you know, more difficult for someone else to do it. The writer himself or herself can obviously do a better job, but it's still difficult because, like you said, you're taking hundreds of pages and putting it into an hour, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hours, you know, of a movie. So.
Well, it's very interesting because I'm sorry, what that makes me ask the question about, there would obviously have to be two different types of writers within that entire scenario. You have the person who's actually penned the work, and then you have the person that is in that transitional phase of penning the work to where it can be viewed on the large screen and capturing as much as possible of the originally penned work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So go ahead, Robert. Go ahead.
No, so like when you see, you know, like sometimes if I read a book, you know, and I know that there's been a film made from the book, I tend to not watch it, you know, or it's either or for me. Either I can't read the book or I can't watch the film. And so because there's just so much that's left out, and it's frustrating for someone that's read a book to see that interpretation on the screen, and they're like, okay, what happened to this? And this was important, and why didn't they include this? And so if you're going to transition, you know, a book into a movie, you know, and you have someone different writing the screenplay that actually wrote the book, then those two need to at least collaborate and say, okay, this is what needs to be included for people to really understand the story. You know, a lot of times that's not what happens. People buy the rights from the books, you know, to make the film, and they have somebody else write the screenplay. Right. You know, but if you're going to have two different people, then I think it's important to have those people, you know, get together and say, okay, this is what really should be included in the film.
Well, you know, you made an interesting point. I know a lot of people that are readers. I'm not a reader, I must confess. I would go see the movie rather than read the book, right? But as you said, I know a lot of people who have read books and a movie comes out and they will not see that movie because it'll make them upset because it never really sticks to what the book is. Now, in the translation, as you were talking about, sometimes some of it balances out because, say you have a scene where a man and a woman kiss, okay? in the movie, in the film version, all the elements happen at the same time. So that kiss might take 5 seconds. But when I read the book, it says, slowly she moved towards him. She touched his rugged chin. The aroma of candles in the room. So it's taking 20 minutes for these two to kiss. So, so that's why I like the movie better. But I understand your point.
I actually like that. I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that in my. I take notes right now.
Hey, that's straight Harlequin right there.
Yeah, that sounds like the Three Stooges slowly return, step by step.
But also, it's about money too. So they're trying to, as you said, they're trying to fit it in that under 2 hours attention span, and it really does disservice to the book. The only good thing from it, I guess, sometimes is if the movie is a really big blockbuster where it ends up making a lot of money, it also tends to drive people to buy the book, after they've seen the movie, if they've never heard of the book.
That's a great point. It's a balancing act. But on that thought, we're going to come back and finish touching on those areas where the balancing, if you will, of between the reader and the viewer. This is Book of That Radio Show. I'm Dr. Robert Benson with Robin Carroll and my main man, Eddie G. And we'll be right back.
Are you struggling with debt collectors? Scared to answer the phone? Order Dr. G's Man Survival Kit and learn how to stop creditors. Visit www.ygliv.com or call 800-705-6840.
Hey, and we're right back. This is Dr. Robert Benson with my main man, Eddie G. and Robin Michelle Carroll, who has penned a book called Two-Faced. And when we left off, we were really talking about something that I thought was very profound and very interesting because, as Eddie and Robin have both alluded, there are people who either read the book or watch the movie. And then one or the other is in kind of offended or feel deficient, if you will, by the other when they witness the other, if they do. And then there's people who are driven to do the other by the other. Am I making sense? Like the person who reads the book is driven to see the movie, and the person who sees the movie is driven to write the book or read the book. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, yeah.
Hey, whatever puts more money in Robin's pocket, that's what we want.
That's right, for sure. Yeah.
But to kind of go back to the point that Eddie made about how the movie is about attention grabbing, attention keeping, if you will. That we got attention spans that are very, very short. Well, one thing I've noticed over the years in the movie industry, and I mean it's even in the small screen as well now, is that there's one thing that typically is selling everything right now, and I hate to throw it out there, is sex, okay? Sex sells, right? Sex and violence. Am I right?
Yes, that is correct.
And if the more movies you see, not necessarily in the books, but there's a lot of that are getting people's attention. It's drawing people to the box office, and it's putting money in people's pockets like Robin. So, Robin, my question to you is this, is as you continue to pen and as what you've penned so far, and someone's going to grab it and try to transition it to the big screen, how do you approach the propensity, if you will, not necessarily propensity, but the need to address that topic to keep people's interest?
I think it's important to note that, there's sex and violence in my book. So it would be, if there wasn't, then I think it would be more difficult to, translate that to the big screen. But, the fact that I already have that in my book, I think would make it a bit easier, because I understand, as a person that reads and as a person that is a moviegoer, that's what sells. And you want to make sure, when you're writing that you keep people's attention. You can't have, action, every single page because you got to get to know the characters. You got to build a story. But, I understand that those elements are important. And so, if it comes down to it and someone's talking to me about, turning my book into a film, then I can say to them, well, this is the story, this is the climax, and these things happen. And so, it won't be a problem for me to be able to kind of, have that happen on the big screen because it's there in my book. Like I said, it would be a little bit more difficult if those things weren't there, but, like I said, as a reader and as a moviegoer, I know that these things sell. Those are the kind of things that I watch. Those are the kind of things that I read. No, it doesn't just have to have those elements, has to have other things also. But I know that, I'm okay with violence and sex, because that's what I'm used to seeing and that's what I'm used to reading.
Okay. So in a nutshell, then, when you write this book, the next one, you're going to have X number of pages, and there's going to be X number of violent scenes and X number of sex scenes. Now, that brings me to my next point, because if you are the creative writer and Ed's a creative artist, there's absolutely no way you can say that before you sit down to do anything, is there?
I think to your point, because you said that there's going to be, X amount of violence and X amount of sex, I think it's important that, to note that it's a story, and so you don't want to just put things in there that doesn't make sense because you're trying to sell the book. Right. You want to make sure that it all comes together and it all makes sense. You don't want it to be, all this gratuitous violence for no reason. So when you're reading a story, even when you're watching a movie, you're just like, okay, why did they do that? That doesn't make any sense. It has to all make sense, or no one's going to want to watch it, no one's going to want to buy it. And so, when I start out writing a story, I don't say to myself, I need to have 5 sex scenes. I need to have 5 killings. I just say, I need to make sure that, this story is interesting and that it flows and that everything comes together and makes sense. And I think that I've done that, and I'll do that in this next book. But, I am curious to see when people read the first book, what kind of feedback I'm going to get. Are they going to say, hey, you know what, you should have put more sex in there? You know what I mean? You should have had more violence. So it's always interesting to get people's feedback to see, what people are really looking for. Does that mean I'm going to make sure the next book has more sex and violence? Not necessarily. Mm-hmm. Like I said, it still all has to make sense to me. And if it doesn't make sense to me, then it's not going to make sense to the reader.
Yeah, that's a great point. The other thing I was going to say before Eddie jumped in here is that you really have to be aware and cognizant of who your audience is, because let's face it, everyone doesn't read all the the same stuff. You got to pen your musings to who it is that is going to entertain it or at least read it, if you will. But Ed, what were you getting ready to say?
Well, I agree with the storyline. If you build the storyline the way that it comes from Robin's mind, whatever happens. It's just like real life. You don't really control it. Once she starts putting her story down, it evolves. It goes this way, it goes that way. She makes a determination on what stays and what goes, but it's almost like it has legs of its own. Her mind's creating it, but it begins to form and go in different directions. And, that's just how it is. She can't control that. She controls what goes in at the end, but what comes out of her mind is just that, and that's just how the story is. So if her stories are in that direction, of course, when you get with a big publisher and they might throw those things in, it's just like the music industry and the movie industry. When they see your book sold 10 million copies and your next book is about how to raise goldfish, they might say, well, let's go back from the goldfish to the action, and you can work it that way. But it's her personal audience that she's building with her stories. So she has to start from being true to her own ideas, and that develops from there.
But
thank you for saying that, Ed.
But
I just want to say thank you.
But Robin, before you kick in, the thing I wanted to remind the audience of is that Robin's a little touched, and she's got different people and different characters talking to her all the time. So we don't know what's coming next, huh, Robin, huh?
That's true. You know, I my whole life, I've had people say to me after they've read something that I've written, you know, or even I can just tell a story off the top of my head, and people are like, "How do you come up with that stuff? Like what goes on in your head?" And I'm like, "You don't want to spend a day in my head." Like, I tell people that I'm an insomniac, and the reason for that is because I literally have stories like that go through my head like a film all day long, and especially when I'm asleep. And so sometimes that keeps me from, you know, actually sleeping. Like, I came up with the idea for the sequel, like the main content, like what I wanted the main story to be for the sequel, while I was asleep. I literally woke up, you know, at 2 a.m. and spent the next few hours before I had to go to work, you know, kind of jotting down like these different things that I wanted to make sure that I included in the book, you know, and typically that doesn't happen to me. Like, I have the story and I just kind of let it flow. But because I have all these same characters that I'm putting into the sequel, I want to make sure that I cover, you know, all the different areas that I touched in the first book. But I had no idea what the actual story was going to be about. And so when that story popped in my head, I'm like, oh my God, you know, let me see how I can make all these different characters fit into this story. So, and like I said, that doesn't normally happen to me, but, you know, that's been my whole life, like those, you know, people talking to me, and it's like an ongoing film. And I'm okay with that, you know, because that keeps my creative juices flowing all the time, you know. And I wanted to touch on what Ed said, that, you know, the good thing about what I've done, you know, as far as, because I was trying to decide if I wanted to go the traditional route, you know, and go through a traditional publisher, or if I wanted to self-publish. And I did all the research. I talked to a lot of people. I went to conferences to kind of see, you know, what people thought. And the bottom line for me is what Ed said. I want my story to be just that, my story.
Wow.
You know, the way that I wrote it, the way that I want it to be depicted to my audience, you know, and I don't want someone coming in and saying, you need to change this, you need to do this, you need to do this. You know, when the book blows up, because I'm not going to say if, when it does, and then I have all these people in place that want to tell me what to do, I think, you know, the fact that my book has sold well, you know, based off of, you know, what I've done, will give me more leverage to say, no, this is what my readers want, and I want to stay true to that, you know. So I think it's great for me to have this first book be just what I wanted it to be, even though I had the editor, you know, say to me, well, maybe you should think about doing this and changing this. No, I want this to be the way that I want it to be.
Wow.
So
It's my story, and I'll say what I want to say in it. That's a great way to go about doing it. Absolutely. Well, listen, we're going to take another quick break, and when we come back, we're going to ask Robin a couple questions like, who is the person that really inspired her the most to write? Find out who she thinks the best writer is beside herself, and some things like that. but it's the Book of Dad radio show. Dr. Robert Benson with my main man, Eddie G, and Robin Carroll will be right back.
The U.S. dollar will collapse. Learn why you should buy physical silver and gold. Order Dr. G's P3. Plan, prepare, protect. Visit www.ygliv.com or call 800-705-6840.
Hey, and we're right back. Dr. Robert Benson with Eddie G and Miss Robin Carroll on the Book of Dad radio show, only on Life and Spirit Online and NASCA Network. But when we left off, Robin was talking about how one night she just got, compelled to wake up at night and finish doing something. But that's not anything that's not a unusual thing for me to do, men. You know, I mean, I get up every night because.
Yeah, I get up because I have to go to the bathroom.
Exactly.
4 hours in, I gotta get up.
So, I mean, if there's some kind of motivation to go with that, so be it. But for me, and like Eddie G, obviously, we get up, we got to do something else. But anyway.
Yeah.
You guys should,
And I'm not writing anything down.
But there is some paperwork done, just for that. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, but just to kind of get back to what we were talking about, Robin, this is some great stuff here. I mean, that the fact that you're handling us, teasing you, and coming back at us is really good. But I'd like to ask you a question, just on the outside of things. I mean, one, who is your favorite author, and what has really motivated you to write? Is there anybody in your life in particular, or that isn't in your life anymore, that has kind of motivated you to do the things that you do?
Okay, so I'm going to start with the latter part and say that my grandmother was the one that inspired me to write. Mm-hmm. We used to have, I was a very introverted child. I didn't do, a lot of talking. Mm-hmm. I was just really quiet, and I just kind of really, kept to myself. And, I think, my grandmother kind of saw that, and, she thought that giving me a journal, would help to, write down some of my thoughts and, help me put my feelings out there, since I wasn't very, talkative. Right. And so, that journal became like a habit for me. Like every year she would give me a journal. Other people started giving me journals, and I would write my thoughts, in those journals. And, that was how I realized that, that was the best way for me to communicate, at the time, to just write those thoughts down. And so if it wasn't for her giving me that very first journal and having that conversation with me and saying, hey, I think that this would be good for you to kind of, put your emotions out there, then I don't know that I would have become a writer, without that very first journal, and, what kind of helped along with that was, when I was in the third grade, I had this teacher, again, very quiet in class, kept to myself. She gave me a book, Little Women. That was my first ever real book that I read, other than, you had those those books you read in first and second grade, Spot the Dog and that kind of thing. But she gave me my first real book, Little Women. And from that moment on, I became this reader, this avid reader. I was thirsty for a book. Every time I finished a book, I ran and got another book and another book. And, those books helped me to go to a place that, I had never been before, and to get to know those characters and feel their emotions and that kind of thing. I wanted to give other people, that chance to feel the way that I felt when I was a little girl and read books, and said, wow, this really kind of takes me away from real life and, gives me a chance to go someplace else and not think about what my problems are and what's going on in my life. So I wanted to, do the same thing for people that read my books and give them that same opportunity that was given to me. So.
Interesting. So now, just outside of all that, who is your who do you feel is the best writer out there, or do you think that's a fair assessment to try and put out there?
I don't know that. So this might seem weird to some people, but my favorite writer is Stephen King. And I kind of guess that goes along with the voices in my head and that kind of thing. I love Stephen King.
Oh, okay. Wow. Awesome.
When I was a little girl, my mom would be like, she had Stephen King books. And she would tell me that I was too young to read them, and that was during my book fees where I just wanted to read everything. Mm. And she's like, that those books are too scary for a little girl to read. And I'm like, I don't care. I'm going to read them anyway. And so that was big for me. I loved his books as a little girl, and I still love him now, as an adult. Wow. So I would love my third book to be a horror book. Wow. Just go completely out of my current genre and make that third book a horror book.
Oh, wow.
Well, Stephen King is a profound writer, and as I said, I'm not a reader. I'm a looker. So I've seen all the movies, but I've also read some articles about some of his books where it goes back to what you said. He's got a pretty crazy mind, and there's some crazy things in some of those books that never even make it to the movie because they were too crazy for the movie.
Yep.
Right. And I just found some of that stuff out about, it, because it has been made a couple times. And that's pretty good. I like that one. And there's a couple other ones I like, but he has a large imagination, and some of the stuff he comes out with is crazy. But let's talk about your book. Why don't you give our listeners a synopsis on what your book is about?
Sure. So Two-Face is about a plastic surgeon named Dr. Robert Melendez, who changes the faces of criminals and gives them, new faces and new identities. And after he does that, he decides that, he's greedy, so he decides he wants to blackmail them so he can get more money. So what happens is he ends up dead. And he ends up dead beside a woman that, is supposed to be his wife, because the killer is sent to kill both Robert and his wife, but instead they kill Robert's mistress. So now the wife is the primary suspect, but then the killer is still after the wife because they believe that she knows where Robert's infamous list is. And the list is the real names and identities of the people that he changed faces for. So that list would give all those people that he changed faces for, it would give them, the cops, their real identities, and let the cops know what their real faces are. And so obviously none of them want the cops to get their hands on that list. And so they believe she knows where the list is. And they know that she knows what their real identities are. And so they want to kill her also.
Wow. Man, I tell you what, that leaves a whole laundry list of possible suspects, huh?
That's right. That's the whole point. So you got, and the reason why it's called Two-Face is there's a double meaning there. So obviously when people hear, Two-Face, they think, oh, this person is two-faced. They are, a backbiter, they're a person that you can't trust. And obviously that's going to be the case for Melissa, who is Robert's wife, many times within the book, because she has no idea, who to trust, because she doesn't know if they had their faces changed. But then you have the other meaning, two-face. You have people that literally have had two faces. So that's why it's called Two-Faced.
Robin, the thing I want to make sure of is that you're not offering wives a how-to on how to get rid of their husbands, are you? I mean, the more I listen to this...
whatever they take away from the book is on them. But let me say this really quickly. I am an avid Snap watcher, and I don't know if you know what Snap is, but just know that.
I do know what Snap is. Man, I mean, the guy's name...
Oh, wait. I'm lost on that one. You got to bring me in on that.
You know what Snap is? Snap is, man? The oxygen...
I know it's Rice Krispies Snap.
Oh, let Robin tell him what Snapped is.
So Snapped is a TV show about women that snapped and killed their husbands, boyfriends, whatever.
Yeah, I've seen that show.
When I watch show, I'm always like, oh my God, you're so stupid. Why'd you do this? You could have got away with it. So if that means that they take things away from my book, that's on them, not on me. That's my disclaimer.
Hey, Robert Benson, episode 12.
So do I need to have a talk with your wife?
No, I ain't never let you know. Forget it. Nah.
Okay.
No, I ain't even letting her read the book.
I'm just asking.
Robin, I was going to ask you, let people know how to get in touch with you, but I'm really reconsidering that now. But anyway, please, if you would, let all of the listeners know how to get in touch with you, ma'am.
So they could go to my website. It's Robin M. Carroll, so ROBIN M as in Michael Carroll CARROLL.com. So they could go there, there to contact me, Pete, so they can contact me there. It has, all my information, and it'll come straight to me via email.
Outstanding.
So that's the best way.
Okay, Robin, notwithstanding your information on how to kill husbands, we really appreciate you being on the show. And we're looking forward to having your advertisement link out on the website and all those kinds of things. It's really been great talking with you, Robin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Eddie?
Thank you for having me. I plan to release the book on the 23rd, July the 23rd. It's ready to go now, but I have some marketing things that need to be taken care of first.
Okay.
But so on the 23rd, it should be ready to go out there for purchase, and they'll be able to go to my website. They'll be able to go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold.
Well, great. Well, thank you for letting us help you. Thank you for letting us help you break that. All right. We really appreciate it. Did you got something to say to Robin?
Oh, just saying, we appreciate you coming on the show. You're very creative. All six of you and the five voices in your head. We wish you all great success.
Thank you. All of us appreciate it.
You can't follow that with nothing else but to say, this has been the Book of Dad radio show. This is Dr. Robert Benson, Life and Spirit Online, only on the NASCA Network. And we'll talk to you next time.
You can find out more about Robert Benson by visiting his website, thebookofdad.net, where you can purchase your own copies of Robert's books, The Book of Dad, Quotes for a Lifetime of Wisdom, and The Book of Dad 2, more quotes and anecdotes for a lifetime of wisdom.